Hi everyone, Stefano here. Welcome back to my channel. I have another simulation tutorial for you today. I made this scene. We have this jar full of marbles falling down and breaking apart into pieces on the floor, and it's not easy in Blender to simulate all these elements into a single simulation. And so I found this solution that I want to share with you, where I combine simulation and baked keyframe animation in order to get this. So if you are interested in learning how I made this, let's get started. So let's start by creating the elements that we will need during this simulation project. We will need the jar that I made using a simple cylinder. Let's move all the vertices up so that the base is lying on the floor of my scene. I switch to face selection mode, and then pressing I inset this selection, and then I move above something like this, and then I extrude once again the same face, and then in edge selection mode, and with Ctrl B I want to bevel this, and with the mouse wheel I can increase the number of loop cuts in order to have some kind of resolution into this mesh. The same I try to do with this one, only I need less of them, and also with this bottom edge loop here, something like this. And then with Ctrl R I can increase the number of subdivision of my simple mesh here. Okay, so back to face selection mode. Let's get rid of this top face here. Let's go back to object mode, and I want to add some thickness to this object, so I will use the solidify modifier with the even thickness option checked on, and let's increase a little bit pressing shift. You can move this very smoothly. Let's increase a little bit the thickness, and under normals I want also to check this high quality option. Why not? So now we have our object in place. We can get rid, applying this solidify modifier. We won't use it any longer, and we can shade smooth this, and you can see we have some normal issues here, and we can fix this under going under the normal option and checking this auto smooth option. And let's go back to edit mode. In edge selection mode we can shift select these two edge loop, and once again Ctrl B. Let's make this more rounded. Go back to object mode, and we have our jar that we can name properly. Last thing to do is to recenter the center point of this object. Going here, set origin center of mass. You can see that now its pivot point is on the center, and this is very important when our object will be involved in simulation, because the center of gravity will affect a lot the behavior of this object. So now that we have this in place, we can move this up here, and we can add another simple cube. Face selection mode. Let's move this around here. Go back to object mode, and this will be the object from where our jar will fall. So we need an object floor, and so let's scale it on the Z axis and let's make it way larger, something like that. Ctrl A and apply the scale. Now essentially we have all our elements in place, and I also like to turn on this random color visualization to have less boring visualization mode during the work. Yeah, we can call this floor, and we can add a new collection with a passive object, and these two, pressing M, we can move into this collection here. And as you probably guessed, this will be rigid body with the passive type option on, so let's make those two like so. And instead our jar will be a rigid body but active. We can leave all these parameters as they are, except for the collision shape type that we want to switch from convex hull to mesh, because later we will put inside a lot of marbles and we need Blender to be able to calculate the exact shape of this object. So if we move this cube somewhere like here and we try to play our simulation, you can see that we get some kind of boring and not realistic simulation. So let's see how to improve this starting point. The first thing that we notice is that we have this kind of jumping and jittering problem when we start the simulation, and this is because we enable this mesh shape collision type that involves more accurate calculation probably by Blender, and you can fix this problem simply opening this sensitivity tab here and decreasing this margin to something like 0.01, and as we do this you can see that the problem is solved. Now the second thing that I like to do to improve the look of the simulation is to go under the rigid body world parameters and increase this overall speed of the simulation to something like 1.6. Okay. Of course, now you can play around with the weight and the position and work and tweak until you get a simulation that you like much more than this. But for the purpose of this tutorial I will stop here and say I'm happy with this, and what I need to find out is the frame where this jar object hit the ground, and in my case is frame 37. You see this one. So let's go back to the first frame, and now we want to add a new collection and call this shattered jar, and into this collection we will put all the glass shattered pieces that will be simulated after the frame 37, if I remember well. So to have this object shattered into different pieces, we have under object this powerful cell fracture add-on that if you don't see here you probably have to enable under preferences in order to have it on your Blender version. So let's click on this. I won't go too much deep into all these parameters, only I want to increase this noise value in order to have less regular shapes on the shattered pieces, and the material, we don't need an additional material because this will be glass material, so the outside and the inside material will be the same in our case, and 100 is enough for this. Once again, of course, you can then improve this process, adding details and whatever you want to add, but I want to keep this simple in order to be sure to get to the end. So let's press OK. And as you can see, Blender is placing all these shattered elements directly into the new collection that I created. And this is very handy because most of the times you get hundreds or even thousands of elements, and it's very important to have them in a separate collection that you can hide or unhide whenever you need it. So now the Blender ended its self-fracturing process. With all these selected, we want to shift select. You can see that I click a few times holding the shift button down until I see that the jar that is lying on the same place, the jar entire object, is also selected. So now that this one was selected by last, is the active element of this selection, so I can press Ctrl and P and set all these shattered object as child of the entire one. So set parent to object with Ctrl P. So now we have all these shattered pieces that are following our main object. Let's hide for now this shattered jar collection, and we want to create a new one that we can call marbles. And we can Shift S, move the cursor to the center of our entire jar, and selecting this new collection with Shift A, we can add a simple cube. We want also to switch to wireframe to better see what's going on now, and let's scale it down. Ctrl A to apply the scale, Ctrl and 2. You can see here we added a subdivision surface modifier with 2 levels of subdivision, and we can directly apply this. And you have to know that when you are trying to get a sphere from a cube in Blender, you need also to add a cast modifier with the factor value set to 1 in order to be sure that's a perfect sphere object. We can once again apply also this. Let's call this marble, and we can G and move this to the bottom of our jar, and we can duplicate a few times. I want to be sure that I don't move this object so that they will interact with the thickness of my jar object. So let's select them all and move this time here, Shift D and Shift R to repeat the same operation. On the top orthographic view, we can get rid of these 4 that are clearly going outside the border of our jar, so X and delete. And now once again we want to select all these objects, Shift D, and let's move up a little bit and Shift R to repeat the operation. Let's select all the objects once again, and we want them to be converted into rigid body. We want them to be active, and we want a collision margin to be reduced to 0.01 in order to get better simulation result later. So if we now play our simulation, nothing is happening because we just added the rigid body properties only to the active object. And in order to propagate these properties to all the rest of our selection, we want to go here, rigid body, and choose copy from active. So now if we play our simulation again, you can see that all the marbles are interacting with the movement of our jar. But we want to do something a little bit different to improve the starting point of our simulation. So I will move my base object here in order to avoid the falling of my jar, and I just simulate for a couple of seconds all the marbles inside until they reach this rest position. And I want to have this situation as a starting point for the next simulation. So in order to have this, I will select once again all the elements of the marble collection, and I will shift select also my jar object, and under rigid body I want to choose apply transformation. If I now go back to the first frame, you can see that they maintain this position, and the simulation will start from this position later. So we can now move, or you know what, I think that in my original animation I use a little bit more marbles, so let's select few more and Shift D, we can duplicate this. Let's play the simulation again, wait until they reach a rest position, and once again select them all, shift select, select them all, shift select the jar, and rigid body, apply transformation. So we now have all our elements in place. Let's move this base cube once again here, and let's see how our simulation is looking. We want to choose our impact frame. That has changed since I added all the marbles, so now I have the frame number 25, and what we want is that from this frame on, the shattered pieces and the marble inside will start a new simulation with the glass broken going on the table, and all the marbles will spread around and slide away. To do this, what I found as a good solution is to let's select everything and just deselect these elements. So now I have my jar and all the marbles selected, and also I will make this graph editor more larger. What I want now is to convert this simulation into actual keyframed animation, and we can do this in Blender going here, rigid body, bake to keyframe. So we know that the starting frame is the first one, and we know that we want this until frame 25. So let's press OK, and let's give Blender a few moments to add a lot of keyframes to our timeline. So if we frame all these animation curves into our graph editor, what we have now is a keyframe animation of our object. So all these elements are no longer rigid bodies. This is important to understand. Let's hide the marbles collection, and let's unhide the shattered collection. So what we want is that at frame 25, this entire jar object will disappear and the shattered pieces will appear. So this is easy to do. We want to have at frame 25, we want to insert a scale keyframe, and the next frame we just want to put, oh, I forgot something, sorry. Before doing that, we want to select all the shattered elements, and we want Alt P, and we want to cut the relationship from the entire object, but we want them to stay in the last position that we have currently at frame 25. So we choose this second option, that is clear and keep transformation. So now if I select once again, you can see that now our jar is moving, but all the shattered pieces are staying there. So we just added a scale keyframe for our jar object, and we want to make him disappear the frame after. So let's just scale it to 0 and I to add another scale keyframe. And in the same way, we want now to animate the scale of all these shattered pieces. So let's select all these objects. And now this is a little bit tricky in Blender because we want all of them to be visible at frame 26, so we can add a scale keyframe, and you can see that they all get this keyframe at the right frame. The problem is that now when I go back to 25 and I scale down to 0, only the active element for some reason gets this value and all the other didn't. If I now add a scale keyframe, only one piece will be disappearing. So the only way that I found to fix this is to go in here and with the right click, I want to choose this copy all to selected, and this will propagate this value to all the other. And now I can insert a scale keyframe. So now if we deselect everything, we have our jar object that hits the ground, disappear, and leave the place to all the shattered elements. What we missed to do now is to select all these elements and make them rigid body as well. Once again, active, and collision margin also, I want this to the same value. And you can see that if I play now my simulation, I have something, but it's very different from what I was expecting. And this is because all these chunks here are starting their simulation at the first frame of our scene, but we want them to start at frame 25 because this first part is driven by a keyframed animation. So to fix this, we have to go here under the rigid body world parameters, and under the cache panel, we want to change this simulation start frame to 25. And we can also load down this one. And now hopefully they will collide and interact all together in a very nice way. So one last thing that we can do to improve and add some more details to our simulation is to do this, I need to hide all our collection except the shattered object, and I want to select them all, and let's move the scale animation one frame before, so I can see the entire shape before they move apart. And what I like to do is to, for example, select these top elements here, and to make it look a little bit more realistic, you want to have some chunks of glass to be bigger than others. So for example, this neck piece, I like to stay connected. So I press Ctrl J to join them, and then I set the origin to the center of mass. Then I just reselect them all, and I can do maybe the same with this and have this bigger one. So Ctrl J. Let's move back this to the right frame, and let's unhide all the other collections. So now let's see if it's working. If I play my simulation, you can see that we have these that stay together. Maybe this I can try and change it to mesh, probably, to have a little bit different kind of simulation. Yes. And of course now, as I mentioned before, it's just a matter of playing around and tweak with all the simulation parameters that we have inside Blender in order to get what you need or what you like more. Anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Of course, the next step is to apply some cool material like the glass, the chrome, and to lit up the scene. In my case, I used an HDRI image, and then I render it with cycles in this case. And yeah, if you like this video, leave a like or a comment, and I also invite you to visit my main YouTube channel SottoZen, where I constantly upload 3D animation VFX stuff that I create. And if you want more, you can visit my Patreon page. There you will discover the benefits of becoming a supporter of my channel. This project, as many other 3D models and Blender scenes, are available to be downloaded by my patrons. So thank you so much for considering this, and as always, I wait you here with another great tutorial. Ciao!